Okay, so good morning. Now it's the next morning, and I'm gonna mix up the bread. Now I have this nice big mixer, but if you don't have a mixer, you can just knead the bread. You would mix it in the bowl by hand, and then you would just knead it like you do with a regular yeasted bread. The only difference is it's really sticky compared to a regular yeasted bread. So you're probably going to want to put some oil on your hands. You don't want to work a lot of flour into it. And I can send a video that explains all this. But I do it in the mixer because it's easy and I have one. So this is a recipe that I got from a video on YouTube from this Irish guy. And I can send a copy of it. So I am using a scale again. This is the easiest way to do it. If you don't have a scale, you have to use cups, and it's not very precise, but and I wouldn't even know what the cups are, so I'm sorry. I use a scale. So I start with 800 grams of flour. This is for 2 loaves of bread. If you want just 1 loaf, you can half it. I have tried making whole grain flour, like this rye flour that Elizabeth gave me. I've tried using 100% whole grain, and it just makes such a dense bread. I really don't enjoy it. So instead, I do a mix of white with some kind of whole grain. But I do try to get organic and unbleached. Very important. Where's my scoop? There it is. Alright, so we're going to do 800 grams of flour, so I'll do 400 of each. Yeah. So that's 100, 250, 400. Alright, now for the rye, we're going to do rye today. I really like spelt. That's my favorite. Whole wheat is nice too. I always put some whole grain on my bread. It's just better for you. Okay, so now another 400 of the whole grain flour. 119, 260, 387, 409. I like to be more precise with the flour. I don't know why, I just am. 400. Okay. Now I'm going to set the scale to 0. The next step is salt. The original recipe called for 10 grams, but I kind of like salt, so I put 15 grams in. And for me, that's 33 shakes of this, or 33 turns. Oops, only 30 turns today. And then we have our starter. So look at the starter. So last night I put a rubber band at the top of the starter, right where it was when I mixed it. And this is what it did overnight. It grew. there's a way to test the starter to make sure that it's ready to bake, which I did not do yet, but it looks ready to me. I'm going to test it, but let me show you. Can you see in there? It's hard to see. I disturbed it. There. No, I don't know how to do this camera thing. So there it is. It's nice and bubbly. It has a really nice, it has like a sour smell to it, but sour with a little flowery, I don't know how to explain it, but it looks like that. But the ultimate test that I like to use is the water test. So you're gonna get a cup of water, any water, and grab a fork and scoop out just a wee bit of the starter, and then plop it in the water. Just let it fall gently. You see that? It's floating. So that means the starter's ready. Now, if you pull it out and it's reached the halfway point, but it's not floating, it'll still work, but it's not going to make as fluffy a bread. Okay, so if you let it sit for too long, and you can also see on the jar how far it rose, and sometimes it falls. You didn't waste your time. You can still use it. It's just not going to make the bread's not going to rise as much. So, but it's still going to be totally delicious. All right, so here we're using 320 grams. $230, $288, $335, a little too much. So I have to grab some out. Well, honestly, I just use my hands for this. I was gonna look for a tool, but I never use, I always just use my hands. Okay, they're clean. You heard me wash them. Okay, so $319, close enough. Okay. Then the next step is water. You want 460 milliliters of water. So let's switch the unit. And 0, 0, water. I mean, if you really don't have a scale, you can go online and convert these measurements to cups. Okay, so 460 milliliters of water. Two. Three. Only 4. We need 460. Okay, 461, close enough. If you end up with a little too much water, what happens? I forget. It makes it really stickier, but it actually makes it less dense. So, but it's harder to work with if you're kneading it. Okay, if you have a mixer, like I do, I love my mixer, then you will simply put the bread dough hook, looks like this, like Captain Hook, like arr, you know? Put that on the mixer and close it down, and you're going to mix it for 2 minutes. I'm not going to do that right now because it's a McDonald's. So what I'm going to do now is feed the starter, because before you put this back in the fridge, you have to feed it. It's a living organism, so you have to keep giving it food. Let me scrape this down so we can see how much we have. There's the scraper. Okay. So you see, my starter jar is not very clean, but that's okay. I've read about this. Should we clean the starter jar? And most people say no, because it's a living organism. So every time you clean it, you're taking away some of the yeast, and that's what sustains it. So every once in a while, if it gets really gross, I'll kind of just wet the top with some hot water on a rag or a paper towel. But generally, I have a messy starter jar. I have a happy starter though. So at this point, you could take some of this. Well, you wouldn't want to do that from here. Never mind. I was gonna say, if you want to share starter with some friends, like I'm gonna do with y'all, after you feed it and it grows, then you can divide it, and then you would feed it again. But right now, we're just gonna feed it for its weekly respite in the refrigerator. All right. So I'm gonna weigh it. And I know, I have it written down on my board over here, that my jar weighs that's just my jar weight. 685, 707. Okay, so my jar weighs 785 grams. Right here I've got 930. So I'm going to want to keep 100 grams in there. So I just have to do math. It's annoying. 5, 12 minus 8 is 4. I am so bad at math. Okay, so it looks like there's 145 grams in there. So I'm actually going to pull this back to 100, because if I don't want to put that much flour in there. I gotta find a jar. Jars are full. There we go. Alright, the same jar from last night. So, you could actually pull this back to 50. I could pull it back to 50. And then if I add flour and water, I'll have 150 grams of starter. And then next week, if I want to make up to 320, well, I would need like 400 grams or more to bake the bread and then have some left. You always have to have some left, of course. It's like yogurt. So if I did 150 today, 50, 50, 50, then next week I could take that whole 150 and I could do 150, 150, or 100, 100. Actually, I might. Listen to me. I'm probably making you guys crazy. I think I'm just going to leave 50 in here this week. I'm going to give it a try. I'm always shy about that because I don't want to run out of starter. So I'm going to take, what did I decide? Who likes to do math so early in the morning? 145. So I'm going to take 95 out of here. So I just I put the container there. It's already got starter from last night. Or not starter, this is called discard. And I'm going to put 95 grams in here. And just leave 50. That's 50. That's 90. Oh, that's way too much. That's 132. 111. And 100. $96, close enough. Okay, so like I said, this is discard. There are lots of recipes you can look on the internet for discard recipes. I've made crackers, I've made sweets, I've made fritters. There's just a ton of things you can make with that. There's even a Facebook page group called Discard, Sourdough Discard or something like that. I don't know, people are always on there coming up with recipes. So I pretty much just I make fritters with it. I mix it with brown rice and I deep fry it. It's like deliciously greasy. And then I pretend it's healthy because it has brown rice in it. Alright, so now we're at 8:32. This should be okay. I want 785 plus 50 that's 15 to 8:35. So it should be 8:35. It's 8:34. Hey, there we go. All right, so we're going to do the same thing we did last night, which is simply to do the same amount of flour. There's 50 grams of starter in there. I'm going to put in 50 grams of flour, set it to 0. 34. 43. So since I'm just feeding this for it to hang out in the refrigerator, I don't need to make such a big amount. This will result in 150 grams of starter, which is about half what I need to bake bread. But I'm not going to bake bread off of this feeding. I'm going to bake bread off of my next feeding, which will be next week or probably later. And so then I just won't discard. I'll keep all of it or almost all of it. I'll have, from this, I will have 150 grams of starter. And then the next time I bake bread, I'll discard 50 grams. And then I'll do 100, 100, 100. What did I do today? Yesterday, 200, 200, 200. Oh, wait a second. That's not even going to be enough. 100, 100, 100, 150, 150. Yeah, it will be, because I won't discard. So I'll do 150 of starter, 150 of water, 150 of flour, and that's going to equal 450. And I only need 320. So, yeah, I'm doing this 50 grams because it doesn't waste as much flour. Okay, so water, same thing, 50 grams, or 50 mil. Seems like the same thing to me, grams and mils. Okay. I know one's supposed to be liquid. 25, 47, 52, close enough. And then we mix. And I'll just make sure it's really mixed up. No dry stuff. Everything wet, ready to eat. Okay. And it's good to kind of scrape down the side so you can see how much it's grown. Sometimes I even, if I don't have a rubber band handy, I just stick my finger in there and pull it up. So I give myself a line like that, and then when it grows, it's going to erode the line. So you can see how much it's risen there. But in the week, in the fridge, it rises really slowly, which is good for it. It gives it a really tangy flavor, and I like using the fridge. Also, I use the fridge for proving the bread. So I'm going to mix this up for 2 minutes, and then I'm going to come back and show you how to set it up for proving.